So I feel like most people, when they're given a one-word topic to speak on, immediately look up that word, even if it's something that you know and use regularly. Or maybe that's just me, but when I found out that today's topic was context, I freaked out a little bit. I was like, fuck, what does context even mean? You know, what's the meaning of life? What could I possibly say? Turns out that it meant what I thought it meant. And context is described by the dictionary as the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood. So context gives us meaning. And in my eyes, I feel like context can kind of be substituted for stories. Just go with me here. So storytelling is context. It's the circumstances and setting, the narrative and characters. So before I sort of dive into things today, I thought I'd give you a little bit of context around why I'm standing here and share with you a little bit about my story. So I'd like you to cast your minds back to January 2010. Got it in your minds? It was a beautiful, warm summer's night. I was 21 and about to begin my final year of university. I was at a party, drinking and dancing with friends, and I was having a great time. So I even remember I was wearing a new dress, and I felt good, that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling when you've had a couple of drinks and you feel like the whole world is an open door of possibility. But it was on that night that I was sexually assaulted. The perpetrator was a friend of a friend. It happened in a supposedly safe space in my own home. And after he left, I felt numb. I woke up the next day and I wanted to forget that it had ever happened. And from that moment, really everything changed. And while I didn't know it at the time, my experience, while unique to me, is incredibly common. Studies show that 1 in 5 women have experienced sexual violence here in Australia, and I'd actually bet that it's way more than that. And yet, while most instances of sexual violence are carried out by someone known to the victim in a supposedly safe space like my own, all the stories, and this was 7 years ago, but all the stories that I had heard about or read about were brutal attacks by strangers down alleyways. So it got me questioning, did mine even qualify? Was it worthy? Did it even matter? And if it didn't matter, then why did I feel so lost? So as you know, my name is Domini, and I'm the creator of Her Words, which is an intimate and honest web series sharing the stories and experiences of those who identify as women. But before I dive into that, I'd like to share with you another story, the story of Michelle Roger, who is a woman who I had the great privilege of interviewing for one of our first episodes for Her Words on the topic of self-love. This is Michelle here. So roughly 10 years ago, Michelle collapsed. She became super ill. Her heart was all over the place, she was sweating profusely all the time, and she was blacking out often. So in her words, her body was just going into a complete meltdown. So in search of a diagnosis, she visited a male doctor who listened to her story and her symptoms, and he diagnosed her with working women's syndrome. I know, I didn't know that existed, right? He said that it was all in her head. He told her that she just needed to take some time out, she was anxious and depressed, and if she just took some time off, it would all go away. So Michelle left that appointment feeling as if she was going mad. But this time she wasn't willing to have her experience projected in that way. So she went and visited a female physician who again listened to her stories, learned about her symptoms, and diagnosed her with dysautonomia. So dysautonomia is a condition, it's a variety of conditions that affects the autonomic nervous system, so the ANS, and essentially it means that it's not working properly. So it can result in a broad range of symptoms. Michelle now lives with a pacemaker, she uses a wheelchair, and she's on a range of medication to manage the condition. So it turns out it wasn't working women's syndrome. What was further shocking from Michelle's story was that she's part of a support network with women who live with this condition. And she told me that time and time again, these women in this support network had been told on multiple occasions that it was all in their head. Some of them had literally been told that they needed to get a partner and get pregnant and they'd find their problem solved. So these are just some of the ways that sexism and inequality manifest in our society. And I think it's important to include them today because if we're talking about context, I think it's important to acknowledge the world, the context that we actually live in. There's a broad range of experiences where, violence against women sits at one point, amidst a whole spectrum of experiences from the super subtle to the not so subtle. But what I found interesting was that in both my story and in Michelle's, our experiences were dismissed. We weren't believed. I had a close friend tell me, even while sitting at the Royal Women's Hospital after reporting the incident, that I needed to really think about what I'd done. And I had a boyfriend, after breaking up with me, tell me that, maybe I didn't want it to happen, but it was my fault for getting myself in that position. And it was really only through going through counselling at the Centre Against Sexual Assault at CASA that I began to understand the culture of victim blaming that exists, and I learnt to unpack the layers and layers of guilt and shame that I felt as a result of that. But what I also witnessed during that time was the power of storytelling. Because in telling our stories to the right audience, to an open and empathic audience like yourselves here today, we feel validated in our experiences. And we also give others permission to share their own too. I can't count the number of women, when I've told them about my own story of sexual assault, who have turned around and told me too. And that was really the catalyst for starting Her Words. Because if I had been through that, how many women had been through that? How many women were going through it, and how many women would go through it? How many women were holding on to these stories, and so many more? And what did that mean for them? It's a sentiment that Michelle echoed in her story too. She said, "Our words and our stories matter. We matter. Shame rebels in silence, and in sharing our stories, we help not only ourselves, but others who no longer feel alone in their experiences." So that's the power of storytelling. And storytelling is context, and that's really why I'm standing here today, because storytelling has the power to create change. So Paul Zak is an American neuroeconomist and researcher who has actually studied how stories affect our brains. What he found was that when we watch or consume a story in which we emotionally connect with the narrative or character, we produce the neurochemical oxytocin, of which he nicknamed the moral molecule. So oxytocin actually drives empathy. So therefore, emotional connection is the foundation for empathy. Oxytocin makes us more generous. It makes us more compassionate and more trustworthy. And it also helps us engage with those who need help or support, which means that it actually motivates people to take action for good. And not surprisingly, as a result of that, people feel happier. So what does this mean for context, and why is it so exciting? Well, it shows us that stories have the power to change people's perspectives and ignite change. Because essentially, people who are more empathic are likely to do more good for the world. So the media plays a really important role in shaping societal values, beliefs and attitudes. And we know that representation in Australian media is a huge problem, not only when we're talking about the representation of women, but the representation of diverse women. So if we look, there's a couple of studies that have been done. The first was by the Gender Bias Without Borders report by the Gina Davis Institute of Gender in Media. And you can see there, while our population in Australia is made up of 51% women, that's only reflected in 30% of characters on screen. And that's not looking at the kinds of characters that we're seeing as well, the kind of stereotypical roles that we're relegated to. And Screen Australia looked at diversity in Australian TV drama, and what they found was that for these marginalised groups, they're again further underrepresented on screen. And these stats at the bottom are not separated by gender as well. So if we're looking specifically at women, these stats are even worse. So when half of our population are not seeing themselves reflected or are limited by harmful stereotypes on screen, it severely restricts our ability as a country to challenge privilege and create change. And outside the media, if we look at stats around gender-based violence, it paints a pretty clear picture. 1 in 5 women, as you know, have experienced sexual violence in Australia. 1 in 3 women over the age of 15 have experienced physical violence. Young women between 18 to 24 years experience significantly higher rates of physical and sexual violence. And on average, 1 woman a week is killed by a partner or former partner. And these stats are worse for further marginalised groups, so women of colour, trans women, women. This is Australia, yeah. Women with disabilities as well, yeah. There's also a little link there at the bottom if you want to check out the stats online, yeah. So we know that society changes first with individuals, and Her Words is a project that sets out to make that change. So with Her Words, each month we interview 4 diverse women and we give a platform to their diverse stories. We release 4 intimate interviews that speak to those stories and a compilation edit that draws out universal themes. So by doing so, we aim to present an alternative narrative to the one that we see in the media and allow women, both the women sharing their stories and the women watching, so women just like yourselves here today, to understand that their experiences and stories are important and valid and your emotions are worthy and real. So we're inclusive. It's like kind of finding that, like Michelle's support network, finding people who've been through a similar experience. It's like turning to women and having them say, me too. Realising that there are people by your side that can help you keep fighting for equality, even when times get tough. So we're inclusive of all ages, ethnicities, backgrounds, abilities, sexualities, and of transgender and trans feminine women. And we're going beyond surface conversation to really educate viewers on the challenges that women face and highlight solutions in an ultimately positive and empowering way. So just like we were talking about, we connect viewers to the personal stories to drive empathy and emotional connection in order to change people's perspectives and drive that empathy. And these are just some of the women that we've interviewed to date. So I know that my experience, excuse me, would have been vastly different if I and the people in my life had been educated on the reality of sexual assault and victim blaming prior to my experience. And that right there is a form of context. No woman should feel like her experience or her story isn't important or valid, or like her emotions are not worthy and real, like many do and like I once did. So now I'd like to show you a little sneak peek of an episode for Her Words that we're actually yet to release. So you're getting a special preview here. And this is on the theme of sex and sexuality. And I'm showing you this today because, again, I think it speaks to this theme of context and shows us how we can use our stories to make sense of our lives.
If I want sex, I get it. So if that means texting some guy that I've been chasing and then I get him in my bed, then yay for me. And if anyone's going to judge me on that and think that I'm a slut and this and that, just fuck you, because you live your life the way that you want it and I'm living mine and I'm not going to apologise for it. I wouldn't say I had a sex education, I had a sex repression. I think the first kind of sexual curiosity and education that I got was through watching porn. It was like a door opening in a way.
I remember my sex talk consisted of, if you're into a guy and you're in bed together, just make sure there's a condom on that penis at all times. It has to be a condom on his penis.
Yeah, and I don't remember learning anything in school. I remember reading Dolly Doctor.
It's so important to educate yourself about sex. You can have however much of it you want, but you need to be educated and you need to be healthy.
I asked my neighbour, I was like, what's masturbating? And she was like, it's when you touch yourself. And I was like, what? Same with blowjobs. I think I found out about blowjobs from a friend, went home, asked my parents if they had oral sex, and they were like, again, yeah, I guess.
What does sexuality mean to me?
Sexuality for me means...
I think sexuality is really important for a woman and I think it's an empowering thing.
It means pleasure and it means connection to my body.
Being free to explore your sexuality in whatever way feels natural within your body.
It means deeply connected to my body, and for me that comes through a a spiritual, energetic practice.
Finding ways to get in touch with my body, whether that be masturbation, whether that be sex with other people, was actually a pretty radical thing. Like, I still have to check in with myself and go, how am I feeling? What do I want? What do I want to say yes to? What do I want to say no to?
You need to be getting yours too.
Masturbation was very not on and a sin and dirty.
I think I started masturbating when I was like 3 years old.
So the $7 vibrator had like unleashed the beast. All of this is really amazing for getting to know yourself, also a lot of self-respect.
I think it was one of the key ways that I started to work through some of the shame that I had, giving me a sense of self-confidence and a sense of knowledge about my body.
And knowing what you can get up to. It's so important to provide a space for people to let go of this stigma and taboo that they're holding on to, because that is a constriction in our expression of who we are.
I think I was just ashamed of my vagina.
If you weren't having orgasms, you're frigid and there's something wrong with you.
You know, you can't just like come, like that's not how it works.
Or even just my breasts, or just being naked. I just felt like I wanted to be covered.
You know, with guys when they're getting laid and all that kind of stuff early in high school, it's like, oh yeah, you know, yeah, Robbo's a fucking champion, yeah, fuck yeah, you gotta root for blah blah, oh yeah, she's a fucking slut.
You know, we're taught to do sex in a very particular way, to show pleasure in a very particular way, to make sounds in a particular way that show that you're into it, you know.
To find love, you have to find yourself and love yourself.
It takes us years to actually start to think about critically and explore.
What we need to be teaching our women is, you know, you can be on your own, you can find who you are as a person, you can do whatever you want.
And do so without shame, or even with shame in moments, but then moving through that.
I hope you enjoyed that. I think I forgot to mention earlier that with Her Words, so each month we focus on a different theme. So that could be anything from sex and sexuality, like you just saw, to self-love, to feminism, to sexual assault and victim blaming. They're all topics that we've covered so far. So in that episode, we cut together 4 women's stories to tell a larger story. So we added context to give the episode purpose and meaning, because while all of us have stories that are unique to us, there are universal ties that bind us together as human beings. So just like the personal is political, I don't think that we can actually separate the two. And I think that's part of the reason that makes stories so powerful. When watching them, we're confronted with aspects of ourselves that we may not have explored yet. Ideas that have laid dormant for years that are suddenly brought to life. We gain the words to articulate things that we couldn't articulate before. We realise we're not alone. We question things that we once took for granted. We connect and we empathise. And I think that's part of the power of art and creative pursuits as well. I read a really great article by the author Charlotte Wood just the other day, and she was writing specifically about women's anger. But she had a really great quote that I'd like to share with you. Art. It's a home to go to, a place to take the shame and the rage and the confusion and the fear and lay it all down, all of it, and stare it in the face. And in this space, we can wrangle with it, conquer it, shape it into something transcendent or powerful, something funny, something beautiful. It's a way to understand ourselves, a way to make sense of our world, a way to understand how we can just be, how we can move through our days, how we can survive. A way to explore who we are, and I guess it's our own kind of context. So what have I learnt after a year of interviewing women and sharing their stories? I've learnt that running a social enterprise that has no clearly identifiable revenue streams is bloody hard work. But that when you believe in the work in these stories, and when you hear amazing feedback from women who are seeing parts of themselves reflected on screen that they have never seen before, it's 100% worth it. Passion and purpose trumps money any day, but a little money would be nice too. I've learnt that everyone has a story, even if you're not aware of it yet. So every single person in this room has a story, a reason for being here today, and I urge you to embrace that story, to let it be seen, to put yourself out there, to be vulnerable, and in doing so, find your people and connect with those who matter most. I've learnt, above all, that everyone, in tiny or big ways, can do something to make this world a better place. And so before I sign off and wish you a happy Christmas, oh, I just turned that off. There's a button on the bottom. I would like to ask of you one thing. Open your eyes to what is happening around you. Don't shy away from hard conversations. It's only through feeling discomfort that we grow. We have to be willing to have these hard conversations in order to create a world where we don't need to have them anymore. We have to face things to change them. So when you hear about an injustice, or when you witness one yourself, ask, what role can I play here? How can I support someone without taking away their agency? And lastly, believe women. When they find the courage to tell you their story, don't dismiss it. Listen and let them know that they are seen and heard. Because words matter, context matters, stories matter, and this is our time to do something about it. So happy Christmas and thank you. Yeah, so my background's in creative writing. So I studied creative writing. I did my honours in creative writing at Melbourne University. And then I kind of fell into the world of digital communications after that. So I worked in social media and content management, in copywriting as well. But I've always loved film and I really love stories. So I love writing and all sorts of stories. And I did a short course at VCA while I was working full-time as the social media and content manager at Kiki K, the Swedish stationery brand. And I loved it. So I kind of came out of that and really wanted to work in that space. But as I said, it's all completely volunteer run, her word, so we don't make any money out of it. It's a complete passion project. So I work, I do a bit of freelance work in copywriting and social media and content production. And then I have a day job at Kiki K as their product content manager. So I write their journals and their books that go in stores. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any other questions at all?
No.
What do you have planned next for her words? Is
Yeah.
there anywhere, like where do you want to take it, or what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, we're really excited. We actually just got we received a grant from Tom Organic. They had a grant, the Female Empowerment Grant, so we just recently received that for $25,000. So yeah, that's incredible. Thank you. So we'll continue creating the content, although we might have to kind of switch. We were releasing 5 episodes a month, which doesn't feel quite sustainable. So I think we might switch that to bi-monthly, but we are going to move into events as well, because obviously there's nothing quite like actually meeting up with people in real life and having that connection in real life. So we're going to move into events. We'll probably launch with an event around International Women's Day, so March 8th, and go with that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.